Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the long, really complex, and often painful history that led to the creation of the modern state of Israel.
So, in 1948, this new nation, Israel, appears on the world stage. But here's the thing. That date isn't really the beginning of the story. It's more like the culmination. To really get what's happening today, we've got to rewind the clock. And I'm not talking decades, I mean millennia. So, how does a people scattered across the globe for thousands of years manage to create a state? That's the huge question we're tackling today. We're going to explore how this deep, ancient connection to a specific piece of land got all tangled up with modern politics and, the very idea of what makes a country a country. All right, let's start at the beginning. I mean, the real beginning. We're going back about 4,000 years to a place called the land of Canaan, what we now know as modern-day Israel and Palestine. This is where the story of Abraham, a hugely important figure in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is said to have kicked off. So for almost 1,000 years, a whole civilization grows here. You have this powerful kingdom that rises up under King David. His son, Solomon, goes on to build the first temple in Jerusalem, which becomes the absolute heart of Jewish religious and cultural life. I mean, everything revolved around it. But this golden age, it comes to this sudden, really violent end. In 587 BCE, the Babylonians roll in, conquer Jerusalem, tear down that temple, and force the Jewish people into exile. And this moment, this single event, it changes everything, forever.
Yeah, that destruction of the temple, that wasn't just the end of a building. It was the start of what's known as the Jewish diaspora, this forced scattering from their homeland that would basically define their existence for the next 2,500 years. And when we say diaspora, it's really important to get this. This wasn't just people deciding to move. It was a forced scattering across massive empires. Now, some did eventually come back and even build a second temple, but they were never fully independent again. They were always under someone else's rule, whether it was the Persians, the Greeks, or maybe most fatefully, the Romans. So in the year 70 CE, after a big Jewish revolt, the Romans had enough. They just crushed Jerusalem, destroyed that second temple, and scattered the Jewish people yet again. And what followed was centuries of hardship. I mean, under all these different empires, Jewish communities faced these repeating cycles of persecution. Everything from harsh restrictive laws under the Byzantines to, just horrific massacres during the Crusades.
And by the time we get to the modern era, this long history of persecution kind of morphs into something new, something more specific, a racial and political hatred we call anti-Semitism. All across Europe, Jews were made the scapegoats for everything. They were pushed out of society, and they were subjected to these incredibly violent massacres called pogroms. It really made the dream of just living a safe, normal life seem completely impossible.
So faced with this seemingly endless cycle of hate and violence, a new and pretty revolutionary idea starts to bubble up. And it's a political idea, not just a religious one. It's built on a pretty harsh reality. Just waiting around for other nations to accept you, that strategy had completely failed.
And one of the key figures here is Theodor Herzl. He's an Austro-Hungarian journalist, and he's watching all this intense anti-Semitism grip Europe. He basically comes to this really stark conclusion, which he sums up perfectly here. He argued that the only real solution, the only way to be safe, was for the Jewish people to have a state of their own.
And this idea, this movement he champions, becomes known as Zionism. What it does, and this is crucial, is it takes this ancient religious hope of one day returning to the land of Israel, and it transforms it into a modern, organized political program. It's about action, not just prayer.
Right. And Herzl wasn't just a dreamer. He was a doer. He builds a whole organization. His book, The Jewish State, lays out the vision. Then the Zionist Congress creates the political body to actually make it happen. And most critically, the movement starts raising money for something called Aliyah, these waves of Jewish immigration back to their ancestral homeland, a region that was, at the time, part of the Ottoman Empire called Palestine.
So you've got this growing political movement, and it's about to slam right into a massive global conflict. World War I is on the horizon, and it's going to completely shatter old empires, redraw the entire map of the Middle East, and create this pivotal and, deeply controversial opportunity for the Zionist cause.
So, in the middle of World War I, Great Britain is struggling and looking for any edge it can get. They needed political and financial support, especially from influential Jewish communities. So the British government issues this world-changing statement, the Balfour Declaration. It's basically a promise to support a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Now, think about that. It's a promise about a land they didn't even fully control, made to a people who were at the time a small minority there.
Okay, so after the war, the Ottoman Empire is gone, dismantled, and Britain takes control of Palestine under something called a mandate. And with British support, the foundations of a Jewish state really start to take shape. Immigration, that aliyah, just explodes. Modern cities like Tel Aviv literally spring up from the sand dunes. And incredibly, the ancient Hebrew language is brought back to life as a modern national language. But, and this is a huge but, all this rapid change fueled some really deep-seated fears. It led to escalating violence with the region's Arab majority, who felt like they were watching their land and their future being stolen right out from under them without their say. And then came the absolute unprecedented devastation of World War II and the Holocaust. In the rubble of that war, the international community was forced to confront something it had basically ignored for decades. This so-called Jewish question wasn't some regional problem anymore. It was a global moral crisis.
The sheer systematic horror of the Holocaust, the industrial-scale murder, it just galvanized global support for a Jewish state in a way nothing else could have. For the Jewish people who managed to survive, the idea of a sovereign, safe place of their own wasn't a political wish anymore. It was an existential necessity. It was about survival.
Now this number, 6 million, it's almost impossible to comprehend. But it's not just a historical fact, it became a political catalyst. It completely changed the conversation. After the world saw the ultimate consequence of Jewish statelessness, the argument for a sovereign nation, a place of refuge, went from being a political goal to what many, many people saw as an undeniable moral imperative.
So Great Britain, weakened and exhausted from the war, basically throws up its hands and hands the Palestine problem over to the brand new United Nations. And in 1947, the UN General Assembly votes on something called Resolution 181. It was a plan to partition the land into 2 separate states, one Arab and one Jewish, with the city of Jerusalem becoming an international zone. The plan passed.
But here's the thing. A vote at the UN in New York is one thing. The reality on the ground, that's something else entirely. This partition plan basically set the stage for the final, incredibly dramatic moments. The declaration of a new country, and the immediate explosion of an all-out war.
And this chart, it just perfectly illustrates the 2 completely irreconcilable realities that were happening at the same time. For the Jewish people, this was it. This was the miraculous fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old dream, the promise of finally being safe. But for the Palestinian Arabs and the surrounding Arab nations, it was seen as a profound injustice, their homeland being carved up and given away by foreign powers. It's an event they call the Nakba, which means the catastrophe.
The war that immediately followed that UN vote had instant and just catastrophic human consequences. As fighting broke out between Jewish and Arab forces, more than 700,000 Palestinian Arabs either fled for their lives or were expelled from their homes in the territory that was about to become Israel. This created a massive, heartbreaking refugee crisis that, honestly, remains at the very core of the conflict to this day.
So on the very day the British mandate officially ended, David Ben-Gurion stands up and declares the establishment of the State of Israel. The very next day, the armies of Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon invade. The war raged for nearly a year. It finally ended in 1949 with an Israeli victory. It secured Israel's existence, for sure, but it also cemented the battle lines of a conflict that would go on to define the region for generations.
So Israel was on the map. It was a country. But there was no peace. Those armistice lines drawn in 1949, they weren't an ending. They were just the opening chapter of a much, much longer story. And it leaves us with this huge lingering question. What would be the cost of this contested birth? A cost paid by Israelis, by Palestinians, and by the entire region. A question that is still, to this day, at the very heart of it all.